The saloon doors creaked open, and silence rolled through the room like dust across the plains. Every poker hand froze midair. Every whiskey glass hovered an inch from its drinker's lips. Caleb Whitlock stood framed in the doorway, boots worn thin, hat shadowing the sharp bones of his face. His shirt clung with trail dust, his hands blistered from weeks of labor. No one expected to see him back in town, not after what had been done to him. "Whitlock," a voice muttered near the faro table. A few men shifted, suddenly remembering where their guns were holstered. But Caleb's eyes weren't on them. They were locked on the man behind the bar, Mr. Horace Slade, owner of the Whitlock Freight Company. At least, that's what it used to be. Years back, Caleb had poured sweat into building that freight line, running wagons across rough country, cutting deals in railroad towns. Then came Slade, silver-tongued, sharper than a rattler. He'd conned the board, twisted contracts, and one morning had Caleb thrown out of his own office. The humiliation had been public, Caleb's name scrubbed off the signboard while townsfolk whispered he was finished. Now he stood inside Slade's saloon, where the man liked to hold court. Slade's smile was slow, poisonous. "Well, if it ain't the drifter come crawling home, looking for work, Whitlock." Laughter rippled from the men at the bar. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice was even. "I ain't looking for work, Slade. I'm looking at what's mine." The room stiffened. Behind the bar, Slade's hand rested easy on the polished wood, but his eyes gleamed. "Yours? You've been out on the line hauling crates for pennies. You've got nothing. This is my town now." A hush followed, except for the soft clink of Caleb setting a folded deed on the counter. The men leaning close squinted at it, their eyes widened. Slade's grin faltered. "Bought it outright," Caleb said, low but steady. "Every wagon, every horse, every contract, signed over yesterday. The company's mine again." The silence broke into murmurs, chairs scraping. Some men looked to Slade for his reaction, others to Caleb, as if weighing which man carried the stronger hand now. Then came a sound that cut through the noise. Bootsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming up behind Caleb. He didn't turn. The whole saloon waited to see whose shadow was stretching long across the floorboards. The bootsteps stopped just behind him. Caleb could feel the breath of the room hold still. "Didn't reckon I'd see you again, boss," came a voice, low and gravelly. Caleb turned slowly. There stood Eli Turner, a foreman from the old days, one of the few men who hadn't spat on him when Slade threw him out. Eli's beard was streaked with gray now, his eyes rimmed with sleepless nights, but in them flickered something Caleb recognized. Loyalty. Bent, but not broken. Slade barked a laugh. "You call him boss, Eli? That's rich. He's got a paper deed, sure, but deeds don't mean nothing without men to haul freight. My men. You think they'll follow a washed-up ranch hand who couldn't keep his own name on a signboard?" A few of Slade's men chuckled, though unease ran through the crowd. Caleb met Eli's gaze. "I didn't come back to crawl, Eli. I came back to stand, but I can't stand alone." Eli looked around the room, faces turned away, some ashamed, some afraid. Slade had made them dependent, on wages, on whiskey, on fear. If they sided with Caleb, they'd risk losing everything. Slade leaned forward, voice smooth as oil. "Tell you what, Whitlock, why don't you take that fancy paper and walk out quiet? You can keep your pride. I'll even buy you a drink for the road." The offer hung there like smoke. For a heartbeat, Caleb almost tasted the bitter relief of walking away. No gunfights, no blood, just the ache of another humiliation. But he thought of the nights he'd slept cold in desert camps, counting pennies, clawing back every dime until he could strike a deal with Eastern investors. He thought of his father's freight brand, burned out by Slade, and how men still whispered that the Whitlock name was cursed. Caleb shook his head slowly. Not this time. Eli's jaw tightened. Then, with a slow motion, he slid his hat from his head and placed it on the counter beside the deed. "If Whitlock's running it, I'll work for him. Done breaking my back for a man who spits on the ground he walks." Gasps rippled through the saloon. Slade's smile didn't break, but his knuckles whitened around the glass he held. "Careful, Eli. Careful, all of you. You're listening to a dead man talking." A new sound carried in from outside, the hollow rattle of wagon wheels, heavy and fast. The murmur inside dimmed as the rumble grew louder. Through the open saloon doors, dust was rising. A column of riders and wagons was thundering straight into town. The wagons barreled down Main Street, iron rims biting into the hard-packed earth. Behind them came riders, 6, maybe 7. faces shadowed beneath broad brims, rifles slung loose in their hands. The town scattered, shopkeepers slamming shutters, mothers dragging children off porches. Inside the saloon, every man craned toward the door. Slade's grin spread again, sly and cold. "Looks like my boys just got back from the north route, and wouldn't you know it, they don't take kindly to folks meddling in their pay." The riders drew up outside, horses blowing hard, sweat streaking their flanks. One dismounted, a scar-faced brute named Harlan Pike, Slade's enforcer. He strode inside with the clink of spurs, rifle in one hand, like it weighed nothing. His gaze swept the room, landed on Caleb, and didn't leave. "Well, well," Harlan drawled. "Thought you were buried in the desert somewhere, Whitlock. Guess Slade didn't salt the earth deep enough." Laughter rumbled from the riders outside. Caleb stood firm, though the pressure in his chest was near crushing. He felt Eli shift closer beside him, hand hovering near his revolver. But 2 men against 7 gun hands was a fool's math. "I'm not here for a fight," Caleb said, voice steady. "I'm here for what's rightfully mine. Every wagon, every horse, every mile of road your boots trample, they belong to me now, and you know it." The scar across Harlan's cheek twitched as his smile faltered. He glanced at the deed still on the bar. Slade stepped forward quick, sensing the shift. "Don't listen to him, boys. He's playing you with paper tricks. You ride for me. You eat because of me. You think Whitlock can keep you fed? You think his pockets run deep enough to pay men like you?" The room pulsed with silence. Even the riders outside seemed to hesitate, waiting. Caleb took a breath, reached into his coat, and drew out another folded paper. Banknotes, heavy and real. He slapped them on the bar beside the deed. "First week's wages in advance. More where that came from. I didn't claw back from nothing just to watch Slade choke the life out of honest men." The riders' faces shifted, whispers curling through the doorway. Harlan's jaw clenched, torn between the weight of loyalty and the shine of money. Then, suddenly, he swung his rifle up, the muzzle leveled at Caleb's chest. "Orders are orders," he said, "and Slade says you don't leave this saloon alive." The rifle's barrel glinted inches from Caleb's chest. The saloon's air went tight, brittle as glass. Eli's hand hovered near his holster, but Caleb raised a palm, steady, calm, as if telling him, "Not yet." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then, from the back of the saloon, a voice cut through. "Don't do it, Harlan." Every head turned. A young woman stepped forward, plain calico dress dusted from the trail, her braid loose from the wind. Her name was Clara Pike, Harlan's younger sister. Folks in town knew she'd taken work cooking and cleaning for Slade's men, though her eyes never once carried the same hunger for power. Harlan stiffened. "Clara, this ain't your affair." "Yes, it is." Her voice wavered, but the fire in her gaze held. She looked at Caleb, then at the deed on the bar. "I remember when my pa hauled freight for the Whitlocks. He said they treated every man fair, gave him bread for his table even when wagons ran empty. You—" her eyes cut back to Slade. "You took that bread and filled your pockets instead." A murmur stirred through the men outside, the fragile sound of doubt. Caleb's voice softened. "Harlan, I don't want your blood. I want your strength. You've got men who follow you, men who could ride for something honest again. You keep standing under Slade's shadow, you'll die nameless, drunk on cheap whiskey and false promises. But stand with me, stand for your sister, and your name will mean something." The silence held like a taut rope. Harlan's jaw worked, eyes darting between Slade, Clara, and Caleb. His knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. Slade barked, voice sharp with desperation. "Don't listen to him. He's playing you both. He'll leave you broke and crawling just like before. You think Eastern money gives a damn about men like us?" Clara moved closer to her brother, hand gently on his arm. "Harlan, please, don't sell yourself for another man's scraps. Not when we could build something better." The rifle trembled, barely. Harlan's breath hitched. And then, with a suddenness that cracked the room in half, he lowered the gun. The weight of the decision fell heavy, shaking the floor more than the wagons outside. Eli exhaled, shoulders easing for the first time. Caleb's chest loosened, though the storm in Slade's eyes promised this was far from over, because Slade's hand had slipped behind the war, closing, unseen, around the grip of a hidden revolver. Slade's revolver flashed up from behind the bar, barrel yawning black as night. The crack split the saloon like lightning. But Caleb wasn't the one who fell. Eli had moved faster than thought, shoving him aside, the bullet burning through Eli's shoulder instead. He collapsed against the bar with a groan, blood spilling hot and dark down his sleeve. Chaos tore loose. Chairs toppled. Men cursed. Clara screamed. Caleb's hand snapped to his holster, steel gleaming. He leveled his Colt at Slade, whose second shot froze halfway, thumb tightening on the hammer. The riders outside pushed through the door, caught between orders and shock at what had just unfolded. "Drop it, Slade," Caleb growled. His voice was iron, but beneath it a tremor carried years of rage, loss, and betrayal. Slade's sneer twisted. "You think you've won? You think buying some wagons and turning a few heads makes you a king? This town bends to me, Whitlock. Always has." But Harlan stepped forward, planting himself between Slade and Caleb. Rifle down, shoulders squared. "Not anymore." His voice shook, but it rang louder than the gunfire. He looked back at the riders clustered behind him. "We're done spilling blood for a man who only fattens himself. Whitlock pays fair. Whitlock remembers names. I say we ride for him now, won by old us." Nay, the riders lowered their guns. Some nodded. Some simply looked away from Slade, refusing his command. Slade's face curdled with rage. He swung his revolver toward Harlan. Clara moved quickly, steady hands wrapping the bandage tighter. "He'll live, but he needs rest. He's carried enough for 10 men already." The riders stood in uneasy quiet, waiting. Caleb rose, holstering his Colt, and looked at them. "No more fear. No more scraps. You want honest work, you'll have it. You ride with Whitlock Freight now. And I swear to you, no man here goes hungry under my watch." A murmur of assent rolled through the room, stronger this time, shoulders straightened. Men who had once been Slade's shadows began to look like themselves again. Months later, wagons bearing the Whitlock name rolled across the desert routes again. Trade flourished, men rode prude, and bread returned to family tables. Eli healed, Clara kept the books, and Harlan's name carried weight not through fear, but respect. Years on, folks would still tell the story of that night in the saloon, when a man once humiliated came back to reclaim his name, not with vengeance alone, but with the courage to lead men towards something better. And on the signboard above the busy freight yard, one name gleamed bold again: Whitlock. The sun dipping low over a line of loaded wagons, their shadows stretching long as the trail itself.